Apo Island is a tiny island off the coast of Negros in the Philippines. This beautiful little island is only accessible by boat. It takes about a half an hour to go across the little channel out to Apo Island, and when you get there, you are just completely blessed with a magical view. This gorgeous little island sits in the middle of the ocean, and at one time was a very flourishing fishing village. But what happened in the early 1980s is that the fishermen used cyanide and bombs that were left over from World War II, and they destroyed almost the entire coral reef on Apo Island. Once you get there now, you're greeted with these beautiful little dive resorts right on the coastline, and the diving right now is actually incredibly good. That's because in 1982, they established a marine sanctuary here on Apo Island. 10% of the island is protected as a no-take zone, and that turned into a baby farm that has produced baby fish and corals for the rest of the island. And now it's a thriving dive community, and it also has incredibly good fishing for all the local residents. The 145 families that live on Apo Island all support the marine sanctuary because it has actually given them more food and more fish to catch. So it's a win-win situation. You get to go out diving on these little ponga boats, and there's no real docks there, so you transport everything back and forth to these little boats. It's just a really remote but very beautiful place to go spend some time doing some scuba diving. The island is now surrounded by this gorgeous coral reef that has corals the size of Volkswagen cars. It's packed with fish. The people on Apo Island highly support the marine sanctuary, and they actually have a saying, if they live, we live. Being that there's no roads on Apo, most of the kids are down at the beach every evening. A lot of them are fishermen, and they really enjoy life on this beautiful little island that is a model for how to take an island destroyed, turn part of it into a marine sanctuary, and have the island come back to life. There's very little electricity on Apo Island, and the fishermen, though, now can catch enough fish because of the marine sanctuary that they've built several new schools. The kids have health programs and are well educated, and the people that live there are really happy. So Apo Island is one of the great places to go to and visit the people at school, and then to go out scuba diving and really enjoy the success story that this island has, from going to 40 years ago being almost destroyed to now being a thriving dive resort and fishing colony. I got to go in and do underwater movies and show them to the kids in the classroom, and then hike to the top of the island, which takes about an hour. You can look out and see all the little fishing boats and all the dive boats. It is really a beautiful, isolated place on Earth, and the scuba diving here now is absolutely stunning. The fish populations have come back since they put in the marine reserve almost 40 years ago. Apo Island has a really wonderful little dive center. All the local dive masters, most of them were born and raised right there on Apo Island. They know every single reef, all the fish around the entire island, and they give you a really good explanation each day on where you're going to go for diving. One of the neat things about Apo is that all of the diving is relatively close to shore, and there's also really good snorkeling and also really good shore diving. But here, when you go out on the main dives, there's no docks, so you swim out to the boat, they carry your gear, and you take these little boats around the island to the dive sites. You're at most of the dive sites within about 10 or 15 minutes, so they're all short short dives, and one of the first things you notice when you dive down at Apo Island is the amount of corals that are there now. It is really, truly spectacular. Divers from all around the world come and stay at the little lodge there right on the beach. And the income that they pay for the, being able to go out and see this beautiful coral reef pays for the marine sanctuary. So again, it's a real win-win situation when you have eco-dive tourism that helps supports a local community and helps them keep the coral reefs really, really, really super healthy. At the end of the dive, you climb back on the little boat and you're back at shore quickly for lunch. Apo Island has over 400 different species of corals. They have a very high coral cover there. And what that means is most of the reef is covered with these gorgeous corals. Hard corals intermixed here with soft corals called leather corals. They all grow in the same habitat, but they actually function completely different. These corals, like this hard stony coral, have to live in shallow water because inside of this hard coral are the soft coral polyps. They're like little upside down jellyfish that live in the hard calcium carbonate structure of the coral housing that they built. It's really important that these corals survive on the reef because they actually have gardens of algae that grow within the coral tissue. This algae is called zooxanthellae. It gives a coral their color, like these orange cup corals. The soft corals and the hard branching corals here sometimes are blue and pink and green, and that's because that's the color of the algae that's growing within the coral tissue. This is a very strange looking balloon coral. There are so many corals in Apo Island that it's really hard to tell one from the other. These giant plate corals house thousands upon thousands of fish because they hide in the coral when they're threatened by predators. Here is actually a cleaning station for fish where the small fish come up and clean parasites and algae off of the bigger fish. What is really neat about Apo Island is that 40 to 50 years ago, most of the coral had been killed. And these corals only grow at a rate of about 1 to 2 inches a year. So you can have these beautiful red colored hard corals right next to these soft corals. And then these gigantic lettuce corals that look like a head of lettuce. It's 10 feet across. So some of these corals have been growing ever since they turned 10% of Apo Island into a marine sanctuary, which is obviously what has caused this amazing growth of corals and all of the fish to come back to life in the area. The coral polyps and the algae actually filter the water to keep it clean. Here's little coral polyps that are doing their filter feeding. When the coral polyps aren't feeding, then they retract back into the coral. When they're out feeding, they have that much more soft look to them where they flow back and forth in the currents. The coral reef is housing to all the invertebrates, to all the fish species, so it's really the backbone of the entire ecosystem here at Apo Island. And it's just an amazing place to dive and see this amount of coral in an area that was almost completely killed 40, 50 years ago. These soft corals grow on the deep water ledges. They come in red, yellow, green, pink colors. They're incredibly beautiful to look at. And so Apo Island is really a success story in their coral growth. Sea sponges are one of the most ancient creatures on Earth, and Apo Island reefs are just covered with them. Most of the time they kind of live in the shade away from the sunshine. They're all kinds of colors, everywhere from blue, green, purple to yellow. These sponges suck in seawater through one opening, filter out the seawater, and then the seawater exits out of a different opening. So they're very important to the ecosystem because they actually keep the seawater clean. These giant barrel sponges are the size of human beings, all the way down to these little lemon sponges that are just an inch long. Because of the healthy corals in Apo Island, that gives homes to a lot of invertebrates, like these cuttlefish. They're amazing creatures that can change colors within a split second, change shape. They use their front little fins, kind of like legs when they walk around. They're often out at nighttime a little bit more during the daytime. And this is a needle cuttlefish, one of the really cool animals on the reef. And then the golden cuttlefish you often see out during the daytime. They can go forwards, they can go backwards. They're really, really, really amazing creatures. But the nicest and most beautiful creature at Apo Island is this peacock mantis shrimp. They have front legs they call smashers, that they can smash and break a shell open to eat the clam inside. They have other front legs they call spears for grabbing their prey and bringing it into their mouth. They have a lightning fast feeding response and eyes up on top of these two little tentacles. This is one of the nudibranch species that lives in Apo. Some of them are incredibly colorful. They're called nudibranchs because that means nude gills, nude bronchia. Octopus at Apo Island, this is the day octopus that you normally see out during the daytime. They're really quite a treat to see anywhere in the world when you're diving, is because a lot of people and a lot of animals eat the octopus. This is one of the squid. This flamboyant squid here is one of the most unusual creatures on Earth, the way that it can change colors. This is one of the beautiful blue starfish. Lots of different starfish species here in Apo Island. This is the granular starfish, and then the blue starfish with a sea cucumber. This is a crown of thorns starfish, which actually is native, but if it gets out of control, it can eat the corals. There's sea squirts, all kinds of really cool invertebrates here on Apo Island. There's way too many species to film, even if you're there diving for a week. There are these colorful crinoids that live all over the reef at Apo Island. They're actually called feather stars, and they're an invertebrate. They're an animal, even though they look like a plant. They actually have 5 main legs that go up, and then these frilly, feathery looking stars that go out in different directions. They can swim through the water column and go from place to place. They have these little appendages that come out of the lower side where they can hold onto rocks. These feather stars, almost every one of them is a different color, and they're filter feeders. Those feather-like arms, they branch out. They're sometimes incredibly beautiful, but they're all basically doing the same thing. They're filtering plankton and food from the seawater. But most divers, when they go by, think that they're plants. The diving in Apo Island is just exquisite. There are so many fish there now and corals because of the successful marine sanctuary. Beautiful angelfish, like this regal angelfish, emperor angelfish. They're all over the reef, hiding out in the caves, blue-girdled angelfish. It's one of the best angelfish dives I've ever been on. There's like 5-6 species. These 3-spot angelfish, and then the beautiful little bicolored angelfish. And you can see these fish actually on almost every single one of the dives. Apo has quite a few different moray eels. This is the white-eyed moray, and they actually come out and hunt during the daytime. Moray eels, by the way, they open their mouth and breathe and show their teeth, not because they're afraid, but they're breathing. They breathe through their mouth. So their big teeth make it look like they're trying to bite, but they're actually very peaceful and they won't bite divers. Moorish idols which is its own genus and species and family of fish. They're really gorgeous. You'll see them often in pairs or maybe 4 or 5 hanging out on top of a single coral. The glass-eyed fish live in the caves. These fish remain motionless and they're bright red because the red wavelength of light doesn't get into the cave, so they're actually black. Frogfish are one of my favorite fish. They look like a big moving stone in slow motion. This is a giant frogfish. There's 3 or 4 different species at Apo Island, but this is one that's most common. They move by jet propulsion, sucking in water and squirting it out a little hole in their hind legs. Big grouper are swimming around. These are the coral grouper. They live back in the caves. Again, they have the red color because it actually is black when it's back in a cave, not red. These are the little types of grouper that live on the reef called the honeycomb grouper. And then the midnight snappers. Sometimes these snappers, you see them in schools of 20 or 30. This is one of the ribbon sweet lips. 3 or 4 different sweet lip species. This one's a many spotted sweet lips. And then they have the dotted sweet lips. Sometimes you'll see all the sweet lips living in the same cave or around the same rock pile, all the different species. They're really cool and the babies are really funny looking. These are the triggerfish, the blue triggerfish. You sometimes see these in schools of 500. And then we got the big Titan triggerfish. What this one is doing is attacking me and the camera because I got too close to its eggs. The blue triggerfish are really common. This is the unicorn fish. It's a type of surgeon fish with the bright spikes on its tail. This is one of the trumpet fish. These long stick fish actually can open their mouth really big and eat a pretty good sized fish. They get about 3 feet long. And this is a yellow one. They come in green and striped colors also. And they hunt for the little fish like these chromis and the little damselfish that live up on top of the reef. You can see how important the corals are here on Apo Island because it's a home for all these fish. And here you have a whole mass of wrasse that are swimming around. And then you got the little damselfish. And once again, these fish would not occur unless there was a good, healthy coral reef. And that's exactly what has happened over the past 50 years at Apo Island since they protected 10% of it in a marine sanctuary. You literally can see 1,000 fish on a dive of different species. This is a school of the spadefish. Real slow moving. They're actually a little bit taller than they are long. They're very kind of methodical creatures when they swim by. This is called the humbug dacillus. And you can just see how these fish dance around and live in the corals. And then when you get too close to them, they dart into the coral for cover. If there wasn't a good coral reef there, they wouldn't have a home to dart into and they'd get eaten by predators like these bluefin trevally. Now notice this school of trevally, they're hunting those little fish so you don't see them up above the coral head. They're hiding way down in the branches of the coral so they don't get eaten. So the whole ecosystem here in Apo is healthy right now, from the little teeny damselfish to these big jacks. And that just shows how a marine sanctuary can take a dead coral reef and within 40 years bring it back to the point where these giant ulua, these giant jacks, silver trevallies, can live on the reef with plenty of food. Big school of big-eyed jacks. This one probably had 500 fish in it, and these fish are up to 3 feet long. So when you're diving with these and you're looking up, it almost completely blocks out the sunshine from up above. Really magical and very successful. So these fish know where the marine reserve is, and they hang out primarily in the marine reserve, but enough of them spread out over the island that it gives the fishermen plenty of fish to catch close to shore. This is a long-nosed butterfly fish. Super beautiful. It's got a long beak because it eats little sponges that are way back in the corals, and it also feeds on invertebrates. This is a double saddle butterfly fish, and you see big schools of these. And on the ledges where there's upwelling, you see these schools of pyramid butterfly fish, and then also schooling bannerfish. And they actually hang out in the currents in the upwelling and eat little bits of algae. Here's one of the other spotted butterfly fish. There's so many different butterfly fish here, and like I said, again, sometimes they'll be in huge schools. Now, these butterfly fish eat little bits of dying coral and algae, so they help keep the reef clean, like these panda butterfly fish. There's also a lot of lionfish on Apo Island, and they're native to Apo Island, and you don't want to get close to them because they have poisonous spines on the side pectoral fins and on their dorsal fin. There's all kinds of these critters that live on the reef there, the short fin lionfish and this long spine lionfish. They have Indian lionfish that are more of a black and white color. And then the spot fin lionfish. They're really beautiful. This is a zebra lionfish. So the lionfish are highly poisonous. They stay on the bottom most of the time, and so you can avoid them, but you really want to be really careful of these fish. This is the beautiful yellow boxfish. Called a boxfish. It's a type of puffer fish. This is spotted puffer fish. This is the big puffer fish. It gets about 3 feet long, called the star puffer fish. And then the map puffer fish. There's lots of puffer fish. They're really, really cool. This is a porcupine fish, and the porcupine fish is a type of puffer fish. And all of these fish, by the way, can suck in water and blow up really big, and that's why they call them puffer fish. They also have poison in their skin, so most other animals, including humans, can't eat them. This is one of the saddle tobies. And then they have several species of rabbit fish. That one's a masked rabbit fish. And then you can see when you're looking over the ledge, the coral growth is just fantastic. And there's lots of sea anemones, which allow a lot of anemone fish to live there. This is the tomato anemone fish. And then you have the orange anemone fish. These fish are blast to watch. They're also called clownfish, and people around the world that watch movies know them as Nemo. It's the false clownfish. What's cool about these fish is they're immune to the stinging cells of the sea anemones. So they live within the stinging tentacles of the sea anemone for protection. So it's one of the only fish that's learned how to do this. This is a baby sweet lips. They're often confused with anemone fish. These are the false clownfish, which is a type of anemone fish, and there's usually one adult female and several small males that live on the same anemone. The Fiji anemone fish, and it's really cool because different than a lot of species, the females are the big ones, and they usually have 1 or 2 small males, and then often a couple juveniles living in the same anemone. These are the striped mullets that feed on the sand. They clean the ocean floor. There's also quite a few different types of parrotfish that live on Apo Island. The males are the big blue ones. The females are more drab color. This is a scrawled filefish with a gigantic tail. One of the very special things about diving in Apo Island is being able to visit the green sea turtles and the hawksbill turtles. Now, this is actually quite unique for the Philippines because over the last couple hundred years, the people in the Philippines, like lots of places on Earth, hunted and ate the sea turtles almost into extinction. Here on Apo Island in the marine sanctuary, these green sea turtles are completely protected. These animals can hold their breath. They're reptiles, they're not fish. They have scales, they have a shell on top of their body, which is part of an extension of their backbone. They have a shell underneath their body, which is an extension of their ribs. This is the hawksbill turtle. They're really rare now in most of the places in the Pacific Ocean. They're on the endangered species list internationally. And these turtles feed on algae, and they also feed on sponges and small invertebrates. like this hawksbill turtle is grabbing from in between the cracks right here. These turtles are really magical to be able to snorkel with and dive with, and being that they've been fully protected on Apo Island for many years now, it's really a treat to be able to see them and to be in the water with them, and they have pretty much no fear of people. These sea turtles can live to be well over 100 years old, and they're just magical to hang out with. Apo Island has lots of sea snakes. This is the banded sea crate, but there's no need to worry. Even though they're highly poisonous, these sea snakes rarely ever bite or harass or harm people in any way at all. Matter of fact, they use their poison for grabbing onto fish, and their fangs are orientated more to the rear of their mouth. So even if a sea snake was to bite somebody, most of the time their fangs won't even come in contact with the person that they bit. These sea snakes are reptiles. I mean, they're not fish, so they have to breathe, and they can live underwater for about a half an hour at a time. They use their tongue flickering in and out, and that's how they sense their food, just the way a snake does on land. When they find a fish and grab it, they actually have to chew on it for a little while to get their rear fangs to go into the fish to inject the poison. They're really super fun to dive with. The way you can tell a sea snake versus a snake eel, which is a fish. The sea snakes don't have any fins. Very shiny, very smooth, and they have a paddle-like tail that helps them swim. They lay their eggs up on land, but they live primarily in the ocean full time. Here's one that's hunting with one of the big bluefin trevally. They actually hunt together.